You remember the Hex Girls, right? The sultry and provocative band from the Scooby-Doo series, a fictional eco-gothic rock band. The Hex Girls are originally thought to be witches by Scooby and Shaggy in their initial appearance on stage. Interestingly, the people that best remember them are generally lesbian and bisexual women that grew up on the movies. If you need further proof, there's a few articles talking about their stance in pop culture, specifically their status as a cult, queer, girl power icon. The Wikipedia page confirms as much. More interestingly, they dress as vampires. For those not in the know, the lesbian vampire is a common trope in literature and TV shows and movies. Lesbians and vampires may seem a little surface level in their connection, but you can probably think of at least one. Pam from True Blood, or truly any character from that show, is a pretty good example of this trope. Vampires have been linked pretty closely with sex since their inception, and seeing as how forbidden it was at the time, a step to make them even more taboo would be the implication of queerness, along with the eroticism that was inherent. Female sexuality in the Victorian age was simply non-existent, and an interesting polarization of that would be an attraction to other women. Even the original vampires, the one Bram Stoker based his novel on, the Strigoi, are said to have snuck into houses at night and drank the blood of young, beautiful girls. The Strigoi are a pretty interesting topic, one that I think is best further expanded upon independent of this one. And I highly recommend, if nothing else, you should look into the Wikipedia article on them. And vampires go back further than Bram Stoker, just as vampires do. The Strigoi were first mentioned in the 1500s from the region of Istria, or today Croatia. Supposedly a man by the name of Jurgrando Alijovic, or Jurigrando, was said to have died in 1656 due to illness, but continued to return for the next 16 years to terrorize his village until he was beheaded in 1672. His children fled to Volterra, Italy. Which could bring me into Twilight and the potential that Alice had romantic feelings for Bella, but again, I think that argument is best saved for another time. It is worth mentioning that there is some subtext, however unintentional, that Alice Colin had romantic feelings for Bella Swan. It is also worth mentioning that being gay was considered a mental illness between 1952 and 1973 in the American Psychiatric Association. As of now, 30 years after the WHO declassified homosexuality disease, it is still illegal to be LGBT in 70 countries. This is relevant because Alice Cullen was turned into a vampire in the 1930s, so it's possible she didn't even realize her own affection. All this aside, the first real instance of lesbian vampires in literature was Carmilla, a story centered around the titular character who seduces a young English woman named Laura. In real life, the gruesome and frankly unsettling murders of Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Transylvania, she was rumored to be a vampire as well. It is believed that these two early additions to the vampire lore, real and fictional, have contributed to the mythologies enough that it has stuck around. One thing that continues to fascinate me, and perhaps a lesser-known example, is actually Willow Rosenberg. In Buffy the Vampire Slayer, there is an episode taking place in an alternate universe where Buffy never came to Sunnydale. Willow, at the time of this episode, is not practicing witchcraft and considers herself straight, yet her vampire counterpart is described as a little gay. Vampire Willow expressed an attraction to her human self from the main universe. Willow found this somewhat disturbing, asking, "Would that mean we have to snuggle?" However, in a fight with her, she stated she would rather snuggle than fight. Willow also had to stop Buffy from staking her alter ego, taking pity on her, so they sent her back to her main universe, only for her to die there. Anyway, this trope is further expanded upon in Dracula's Daughter as well, and has continued in modern times. But why? Is it our tendency to stay with what we know? Authors constantly coding female vampires as lesbians due to inherent bias? Or is it something else? Unfortunately, I am inclined to believe that it's because a woman's sexuality is still not fully recognized the same as a man's. I myself am bisexual, and the amount of people that refuse to accept I have an attraction to both men and women is frankly sad. The concept that women can like women is still almost taboo in nature, something I think is perpetuated through still porn and our media. It's a little rare that a relationship between two women in the media feels genuine. Just look at the dead lesbian trope. All that said, I personally do not find the lesbian vampire trope to be harmful. I actually find it to be quite interesting, as is clearly due to by the fact that I made a video on the subject. Taboo nature of female sexuality and the nature of homosexuality are probably catalysts behind this trend in media. Vampires are often portrayed as hedonistic beings, so far from holiness they can't enter churches and blessed water burns them. Milla's presence in Laura's life is heralded by nightmares, and her relationship with the vampire clearly has undertones as well as overtones of something more than friendship. Carmilla is clearly regarded as little more than a monster, first appearing in Laura's life when she is 6 years old. Carmela is described as solemn but very pretty face by Laura even as a child. Carmela is said to have caressed and laid beside Laura, holding her close and waiting for her to fall asleep before Laura feels 2 needles puncture her chest, causing her to wake up. Carmela leaves soon after, and the story picks up again when Laura is a teenager. The introduction of Carmela so early in Laura's life is likely a symbol of what is to come, but it's not unreasonable for the implication of Carmela's attraction to women is more than that. She could be interested in the innocence of Laura as a child and as a teenager. In the end, it matters little what the intent of the author was in these writings. The impact it's had isn't as clear, and while it's possible this goes to normalize relationships between 2 women, it could also serve as a plot to further separate gay and lesbian relationships from that of a relationship between a man and woman, at least in the eyes of some people. The constant portrayal of queer characters as something other, strange, and monstrous is a sad representation of how the LGBT community is viewed even in modern society.